Welcome to AstroChat with Anne Sundell, Kimberly Williams, and Monica Anna. We are three professional astrologers living in three separate countries, coming together every new and full moon to share our 3 points of view on astrology. Whether you enjoy deep dives into the current transits or you are just beginning to learn about astrology for the first time, there is a place for you here. All that is required is an appreciation for astrology, along with a respect for the various traditions within it. So grab a mug of coffee, your favorite cup of tea, or any other beverage of your choice, and join us for a chat on the astrology of the next 2 weeks. Hi, everybody. Welcome back to another AstroChat. You are joined today by myself, Kimberly Williams, and my co-hosts Anne Sundell and Monica Anna. And we've come together today to chat about the upcoming full moon. This will be on February the 5th. And here in the States, if you're in Central Time Zone, that should be 12:27 p.m. Over across the pond in England, we're looking at 6:27 that evening and 8:27 that evening over in Finland. Of course, feel free to correct it to your time zone if you're not in one of our 3 countries. We're going to start off today by looking at the Sabian symbol. Anne, take it away.
Thank you, Kimberly. We have an interesting Sabian symbol for this Leo moon. It says a volunteer church choir is singing religious hymns. So, what can we make of this one? I think that we can think it has to do with the community coming together, searching for people like-minded, trying to find your tribe that way, and being together with them. This moon is also containing a lot more, as we will see or listen as we go on. But this is like the first look at this.
We'll look in a minute to see all the transits for the full moon, but there is something about Sabian symbol that for me talks about the need for the voices of the community, of the society to be heard. And we'll explore, some of the transits that coming with the full moon, but there's something about the community coming together, like you say, the like-minded people, but also people coming together for a cause and actually trying to have their voices heard, so raising their voices and having them heard. So yeah, it's interesting symbol for this full moon, that's for sure.
Yeah, I think we're going to be talking a lot about needing to be heard and finding the community that supports us in speaking that truth as we go into this chart. The full moon, I don't think I mentioned it earlier, the full moon's going to occur at 16 degrees, 40 minutes of Leo. Obviously, the sun will be at the same degree of its opposite sign, Aquarius. So if those are placements that are significant to you in your chart, or even if you don't have planets, if you just want to look at your natal chart and see what houses are being impacted, that might give some information about where or with whom we need to be heard. But before we kind of break it out, let's talk about the fact that the moon is doing its annual dance in Leo, right? We get the full moon in Leo once a year. Here we are. So the moon in Leo, to me, is a wonderful, exciting time. There's energy of Leo that is creative, and energy of Leo that likes to give from the heart. There's an energy about Leo that says, I want to be heard. When I think of Leo, I think of, the Shakespearean actor getting out on the stage. And it doesn't matter if the people in the audience are throwing tomatoes at me or roses at me, but they're hearing me, they're responding, they're reacting. It's not crickets in the audience. So the needing to be heard is so paramount to, I don't feel seen, I don't feel visible unless I'm heard. And so this can often feed our creativity. That idea of I take a feeling or a thought or an emotion and I need a vehicle, a medium to translate that out so that people can receive it. So it might be a really interesting time to think about what are the tools we use? What is the medium of expression for us? And does it feel creative? I think that this can be a time where creativity isn't just about being artistically creative, which is often what we talk about with Leo. But there's other ways to be creative. Sometimes processing my emotions, finding out of the box ways of being healing is a form of creativity. There can be creativity in the mind about how we think, how we process, how we communicate. And since the moon is doing this lovely dance across from the Aquarian sun, this idea of how I'm thinking might be part of that Leo dance. Since the moon is about more of our unconscious state, our emotional state, what's going on not at the very logical forefront of my mind, but what's going on in the back? What's going on hidden maybe from my view? A lot of times we've discussed before that with a full moon is when things that were hidden from view are revealed or come up. So, what is it that's coming up emotionally that is yearning for some type of creative expression to it? Would be maybe one of the ways I think about having this moon in Leo. And I don't want to shirk on talking about all the wonderful things Leo can bring, but those are the main things for me. And I want to hear what my two co-hosts have to say about a moon in Leo.
But yeah, I just thought about Leo, and I think about play, how important it is to have the play in your life, and also to be able to see your own inner child and let that creativity out and find things that are nurturing for your inner child and for your way of playing and relaxing. So that's a few things I associate with Leo.
So Leo full moon, at the full moon, we always see this hidden stuff because we have two luminaries opposing one another. There's nowhere for the shadow to hide. So I always feel like during the Leo full moon, there's this time of looking inside your heart. There is no place for those shadows to hide. So you have to be very courageous, which is very Leonian quality, to look within. And this is the place where, it's the generosity, the childlike quality, the joy that we feel, our creativity that comes from the place of, I just want to create a joyful art, whatever that is. That can be a beautiful oil painting, or that can be playing in a sandbox, with your tool, whatever that is. It's that kind of quality of creating something beautiful and something for the sake of having fun, being playful, and having joy out of that. But at the full moon, we can look at our heart and say, okay, what is hiding there? What are the qualities that, is that kind of the dark side of the moon, right? So what is the dark side of Leo? Where is that courage of mine actually turned into the fear? I am reminded of that story of a Wizard of Oz, and that very fearful lion, and how Leonian that is. That's very much a Leo quality to dim your light, to be afraid. That's the kind of quality of Leo that is not fully expressed or happily expressed. That's the one where is afraid to stick out, their head, because what if, the spotlight will be on me? What if, my joyful play will be considered stupid or childish? This is something that I don't think the Leo quality is fully understood within the culture, the Western culture, because we very much treat, like, to be an adult, you kind of need to be super serious. There is no room for laughter and giggles, and go into any corporate surroundings, everyone is pretty much like that. And this is the place where, there is a difference that we can learn from astrology and from this archetype. There's a difference of being childish and naive, and there is a difference between childlike and having joy. There's nothing wrong with actually being joyful at work. If you have to do the same work for 10, 20, 30, 40 years, well, you better like it. Otherwise, it's more like a prison, isn't it? And again, whatever it is that you do, whether it's, you're working in a corporate environment, whether you're an entrepreneur, whether, you're a stay-at-home mom, whatever you do, it needs to bring you joy. And it's interesting that that sign, kind of that house, comes before the sign of Virgo. For me, this is very much like, okay, what brings me joy and what can I enjoy doing every day? So yeah, that is interesting. One thing I would also bring at the full moon, and I'm not sure if we've mentioned that on a previous podcast, but it's always interesting to look back at the new moon. So what is the seed that you planted at the new moon? So we talked about the new moon in Aquarius a lot and how it was an interesting new moon. And I think each of us have our own story already developing this year, this month. But also it would be interesting to look at the new moon in Leo from last year and having that kind of parallel, like what have you planted in that archetype? What was it about Leo new moon last year that you wanted to grow, you wanted to plant, you wanted to nurture? And what is it that's coming to light now? What can you celebrate and bring to light and say, hey, over the last 6 months, I've really worked on that, and it really brings me joy, and I'm really grateful that I took the courage and follow that? Or what is it when you kind of shied away from that light and it's like, actually, no, I haven't, because I was too afraid? And what can you do at this full moon to let that fear, go, and stepped into that and learn from that experience of the last 6 months?
Good point. I'm going to go read my diary and see what was happening then. I want to touch on the fact that, we're talking a lot about Leo, but there's a difference when it's the sun in Leo time of year versus when it's the moon in Leo. When the sun is in Leo, I think it is an easier time. Well, one, we have a whole month to engage in our inner child and rediscover play and find creative expression. When the moon is in Leo, it's moving much quicker. We don't have as much time. And well, the moon is about our emotional body. The moon is about our past and our memories. It's a much different playground, right? And I think that often when the moon, full moon is in Leo and it's opposing that sun and Aquarius energy, the old memories of when I've been alienated, the old memories of when I didn't express myself because it wouldn't fit in. I think, Monica, you kind of touched on this, and I just want to go further. In the Western society, we don't really make room for children to play. I mean, I remember being in school and in lunch line, you had to stand straight with your hands behind your back. And that's not how children want to be. And the motto of children are to be seen and not heard. A lot of times, especially if we have that joy, exuberant Leo happening, we can get the message from others that that's fine, but that's too much, or now's not the right time. And so there can be this fear of, I don't want to let my joy out. I don't want to be so exuberant. I don't want to be so intense or passionate because I might get rejected. And I think one of the greatest fears the moon holds to is that fear of not belonging, of being rejected. So both the fear that I'll be rejected now or excluded or alienated and the memories of when I thought that would happen, whether it happened or I just imagined it would happen, those memories and those emotions of being held back, I think, are on real strong display right now. And I want to also mention to people that with Leo, when I'm not being heard, when I'm being shamed, when the things that Leo needs are not happening, often what'll come into play is, that saying of the good offense is the best defense. So we may anticipate that I'm going to be shut down. So therefore, we embrace our little child and we just explode, right? We can just bring it. So there can be this joyous creation happening, but the shadow side of Leo can be that we are pulling out the blowtorch and flaming people for all this emotion that doesn't have somewhere to go. Remember, as Monica said, when you're in that full moon, the shadow has nowhere to hide. It is often revealed to ourselves and to others, and it can come up. So yeah, I would just want to say, like, remember to find some joy and to find some play with whatever emotions are coming up to balance that out. Okay, that's my little, here's the shadow side to consider.
And we're
Well,
having elements of fire, so we're having impulsiveness also. I want things to happen now. I want this motion to be seen now. It's Leo, so it's good also to
Well,
Yeah.
it's even more than that, isn't it? And we
Yeah.
have also Uranus squaring that new moon. So literally just even adding more fire to what you're just saying. Uranus is that kind of lightning bolt, not bulb, lightning bolt that strikes. And within the moment it can change everything. So it's interesting that again we have I feel like we've been talking about Uranus for on nearly every episode for the past few months, but it's so prominent not only in the sky with what's been happening. And you've pointed out before we started recording that again Uranus is now going direct. So it's not only changing direction or stopping, but it's actually making connections in speaking to all the important players in the sky. So it's been having this ongoing conversation or argument or, a tense relationship, if you will, with Saturn for the past few months. And they're finally moving away from that. And now, it's going for the same tense relationship with nodes. So there is this feel of underlying the way I feel it's just like there is the cracks that's showing in our relationships, in our world, in our society, that Uranus is just creating that lightning bulb and splitting that picture of reality that we have, if you will, and showing us what's beyond. And it's been doing that with Saturn, I think. There's been a lot of revelation that's been happening over the last, few months on so many layers, whether it's political layer, religious, societal, private. And I feel like, again, at this full moon, the Leo goes, hey, I'll show you something and I'll make connection to both the sun in Aquarius and the moon in Leo, and I'll give you that insight into the weird, the unexpected, the technology, the whole AI has been on a actually it's been really prominent over the last few weeks. I wonder if there will be something going on with that at the full moon. So, I'll show you that, and I'll show you around, the heart and the humanity and actually what it means to be maybe human. And so I feel there is something around this full moon and those two polarities between Aquarius and Leo, when Uranus comes in and is like, okay, I'll bring an inspiration or revelation to create a revolution. Uranus is also the planet or the archetype responsible for the revolution. And like the revolution of the Prometheus, that started from bringing the light from the gods to humans to save the humanity and give them the light and help them evolve and grow at the same time that anger the gods. And there is this element for this full moon when, again, that Uranian energy, that energy of I'm going to bring the revolution and start revolution, maybe without thinking about the consequences. That's Saturn, which for me, it's interesting how Saturn is the traditional ruler of the sign of Aquarius, and Uranus is the modern ruler. And sometimes we think about, how they really don't fit together to rule the same sign. But I think there's actually a perfect pairing, because you can't have the revolution without then taking accountability, because what the revolution kind of is at its core, it's saying the structure doesn't work, I want to change that structure. But then you have to take responsibility for the new structure that you're putting in. And do you? And I think there's something Uranian about this full moon that actually asks us about that as well. Everything that Kimberly, you said about being that, weird and unexpected and unusual, alienated person or a child, very Aquarian quality, and trying to shine that light that is within you, very Leonian. The Uranus will go, it's like, okay, what's in it for me? Where is your light and your fire within you, starting a change within the community or tribe that you have? That's kind of how it feels to me.
Yeah, I also love the fact that, in our last podcast, we were talking about Uranus dispositing or being the ruler of the moon. Now we see Uranus being the ruler of the sun in this full moon scenario. So Uranus is ruling that sun in Aquarius, the sun is ruling that moon in Leo. So it's almost like I get this image of a relay race, where you pass the baton. It's like,
Mm.
Uranuses are saying, I've been telling everybody since 2018, something has to change. Okay, sun, take it away. And the sun is like, yeah, but that change is going to stand out. I'm going to be so visible. I'm going to definitely be square peg, round hole, and it's going to be seen. Let's give that to the moon. And the moon is like, I don't know that I want to deal with those emotions that come up. So I almost feel like perhaps we've had over this last year, with all that we've been talking about, especially with the tension that has been in the past between Saturn, can I make this my reality, and Uranus, it needs to change and be different. Maybe we now see it, maybe we now know it, but it's time to deal with what are the emotions around how it feels to be alienated, how it feels to be the trailblazer, how it feels to be like the prophet Cassandra saying, this is what it needs to be. And everyone is saying, no, it doesn't, but maybe they'll see it later. So that really stands out to me as significant, that these are locked into this kind of dialogue this way. And since Uranus is squaring, making a T-square to that sun and that moon, there's both a desire to shine and the fears, I think, around, but if I shine, I'm going back to the Sabian symbol. Maybe this isn't just about being with my church. It might be about going out and finding a different church, a different tribe, a different village. Because if I'm putting this message out and it won't fit in here, well, maybe here's not where I need to be. Who is that audience that will listen to me? Maybe it's time to venture out. And that might mean we'd go solo for a while before we find that place that resonates, right, with us and our message and where we feel. So I think there's a lot of meat to this particular aspect. Even though we've talked about Uranus a lot, it's almost like there's been that slow churning that's been happening, and now that cauldron is bubbling up. Now it's time to actually see it, understand it, and work with the emotions that have held us back. And I'm just going to point out one more time that to me, Uranus is that very volcanic, that lightning bolt, as you said earlier. It's that sudden change, and Taurus does not want to change. And so internally, we've been dealing with this push-pull for a long time because it's difficult. And so I'm also feeling like Uranus is about the breakthroughs. So this could be saying it's not just I know I need to change, but I'm not ready to. This could be the change I didn't see. Now's when I have the lightning bolt revelation. Whether it feels positive or whether it feels challenging, I think that with this full moon and the 2 weeks following it might be where we actually suddenly realize or see, this is where I need to have a change to support me in being the change I want to see out in the world.
I couldn't agree more. I think I made a note here, standing up alone. There was a interview that I was listening, and one thing that stuck for me from that interview is the woman was saying that if you think that when you stand up to power and you stand up and you know that you're right and you know that everyone around you know that you're right, you can still stand up alone, because people will be afraid to stand up to power. So even though you know you have everyone's support, you know you have the tribe, you know the community thinks the way you think and say what you say, to have that Promethean quality and stand up and do what needs to be done, sometimes you need to do that alone. And I think, again, that full moon, like you say, will bring those fears up. Can I do that on my own? And I think, Anne, you're going to take us to another transit, which I think speaks to literally what we just said as well.
Yeah, it's like in the chart, everything's connected, and we have got an upcoming conjunction of Mercury that's speeding up towards Pluto. That's at the last degree of Capricorn now. So we are facing a shift very soon. And I think that Mercury and Pluto have a bit special relationship, because also in the mythology, Mercury was allowed to visit Pluto's area, the hidden area, and go between the hidden things and the world. So he could actually take a message from Hades, the god of the underworld, to people. So when we're speaking about Pluto and Mercury together, I think about things that haven't been said, things that have been maybe not even known, things that have been secrets coming up to the surface, and also about some serious thinking about what do I think is important, which things do I feel I need to say to get out there. So it can also be a very brilliant aspect of expressing yourself in a very sharp way, in getting the right words, and this is also, or manipulative way, of course, if you want to use Pluto in that way. So it's a strong aspect for communication that is also prominent at this full moon.
Yeah. It speaks exactly to it speaks exactly to again what we were saying as well, Pluto and Mercury. How do you speak to power that power hears you? One thing that it's interesting is that archetype of a jester, of that kind of clown that was at the court, and he or she, you know, the jester archetype could speak the truth to power, as long as it was funny, as long like as it was comical, as long as you made the power, the king, you know, the the lord that you were speaking to, laugh, it was okay. It was still dangerous position to be in. It was still very dangerous position to be in, but that was the only one that could at the court really stand up and speak and challenge the power. And I feel like Mercury, there is something mercurial about that that archetype, that jester archetype, that you can go in and out, you can be whoever you want to be. There's this kind of elusive quality, not elusive, maybe not the best word, but the quality of, you can shapeshift, you know, as a jester you can shapeshift into different places, and that's when I kind of link it to Mercury. You can turn into anything, you can dress up, because it's all about, you know, putting on those roles, but at the same time being the reflection of the person who is there on the throne, in power, you know, ruling over. So that person can see themselves and see, you know, what kind of ruler they are. And there is something about, again, Mercury going into that underworld, meeting Pluto, and then coming up. And with Uranus, again, speaking to that full moon, I feel like we have that the next couple weeks might be interesting about how do we speak to power, for the power to hear us. And going back to that Sabian symbol, how as a society we can link and we can speak up so we are heard. Because unfortunately, you know, people always, if you have, so to speak, ear to the ground, you hear the pulse and the rhythm of the society. The people who are usually the ruling class, whatever, you know, society or whichever epoch we're in, they're so far removed that rhythm doesn't really translate. And the way that the, you know, the society is usually heard is through a revolution, or, you know, these days we would call it a strike, you know, when people gather together and they're striking and they're saying to power, you're not hearing us, this is what we need. So there is interesting quality about that.
Very interesting. And I agree wholeheartedly with what you're saying. We mentioned earlier that for me, whenever Mercury's conjunct Pluto, for me, that's a signature of speaking truth to power, or at least being put in a position where that is something we're having to face, whether we do it or not. And often we only speak our truth to power when the pain, the pressure and the pain of being silent becomes too much. So it sounds beautiful to say, you know, yes, you know, let's do that, but it's very difficult, I think. I think that on one level, this is about facing how we have disempowered ourselves, how we have given our power away. In other words, to find our voice, to express ourselves, to speak our truth, whether we're joining a march, whether we're posting a blog, whether we're submitting a comment on a Yelp review, it can be big, it can be small, but it's that idea of I'm speaking out about, where I see something not going right. And since this is all happening in Capricorn, and I'm just realizing now we haven't shared the chart, so just to give people who aren't looking at the chart an idea, we're dealing with 28 degrees of Capricorn is where Pluto's been hanging out. Here comes Mercury. Capricorn is about the structures in our society. It's about governance and the structures we have in place so all that can work. It's about things that have taken a long time to establish, or we might say the establishment. So I feel like this is speaking here in the US. I can tell you that right now, we recently had a very tragic death, and people of Tyree, and I won't go into the politics of it, but as a result, everyone's like, hey, after George Floyd and all the protests we had during the summer of 2020, didn't things change? And the answer is no, not enough. Maybe some places, not all places. And so again, there's people speaking up and speaking out and saying, like, the system is wrong. We need to change it. And that can be a very scary thing to do, especially as, I don't know, Monica, if it was you or Anne that were saying this earlier, but sometimes you're standing out alone. Everyone around you may agree, but they may not feel comfortable speaking up or speaking out. They may not feel empowered. So you get to be the figurehead. That can be dangerous. That can be scary. And the thing about Pluto is there's no working without Pluto without facing our fears.
Mm-hmm.
And the archetype I love the most, Mercury has so many archetypes. I love that about being the jester. But my favorite archetype that Mercury can fall into is the psychopomp, the guide that takes us in ancient mythology. Mercury was the only god who could go into Mount Olympus, this world that we live in the underworld. There was no like you're stuck in this realm. He was the deity who could travel. And so I feel like this is time for us to take that underworld journey of what am I afraid of? I can see where I think things are wrong or need to change and need some restructuring. What is my fear around that? And I think that this could be a really powerful journey into our own shadow, into our own underworld. And perhaps it parallels or dovetails so much of what we were talking about with that full moon, being creative, expressing ourselves. Well, this might be saying, what is that fear that lies at the heart of all that? I think they're going to support each other and work with each other beautifully and be a bit intense and powerful.
And we have a T-square, so we have energy to work with, and a T-square can be a good aspect or figure to work hard with and to think about what are my intentions going forward. That's a lot of energy in there if we just manage to use it in a good way.
It's interesting as well, just going back to the Mercury and Pluto. I feel like this episode will concentrate on literally like just the three main themes. But I think like those are the main themes for the next couple of weeks until the next new moon. And with the Mercury and Pluto, and we're talking about the full moon in Leo, there is a difference between speaking to power from the position of privilege and speaking to power from the position of you can lose everything. And that really speaks to that Leo full moon and courage. So one thing that's happening in UK at this time is the government is trying to push the law, basically saying that strike or people who are striking, who are essential workers, they might lose job, they might get sacked for exercising their right to speak to power. And again, I don't want to go into politics as in, which side is right, but at the core, if we're taking away people's right to free expression and to say, I need the power that be to hear me, that's already a dangerous dictatorial water, very Plutonian water that we're going into. Because ultimately this is the people's right to say, no, I disagree, something goes wrong and I want you to hear us. And through the history, if we look back, most of the rights and the privileges that I'm talking about that we actually got, we didn't get them because someone felt, in power, felt generous. We got them because we striked. women didn't people didn't open universities to women in Western countries just because they felt like it would be lovely to have them around. They opened them because we fought for that. This is just one of the many, many examples. But it's usually the society that pushes back on power, the kind of, the Plutonian, when it gets too much, we push back. And that's when we're creating that space for ourselves. So it's interesting that, again, around the time of that new moon in Aquarius that we're talking, and now the full moon, this is something that's happening in UK, that the government, the powers, trying to grab even more power and saying, if you don't like your job and you want to speak up about this, you will lose even what you have. And that's a dangerous place to be. And that's when we're talking about that full moon in Leo and that courage, that Leonian courage. That really takes, if you know you can lose everything, you can lose the support, of your job, to support your family, to support your loved ones, to support your children. That can be enough of a fear, real fear, reality fear, a reality check, not to speak up. So there is this element, again, for me, around that Mercury and Pluto and Sagittarius. What structure do you have? Maybe you are the jester. Maybe you are close enough to power to speak up. Maybe you are, the partner of that CEO. And if the people of that CEO can't tell him what's wrong with the company, you can, because you're their partner. And you can say, oi, honey, I really don't think that, that decision was the brightest one, like, are you in the privileged position? Again, that might be just a silly example, but are you in the privileged position to make that influence on the power, to use your heart and that Uranian impulse and speak up without the need of repercussion to help, the rest of your tribe? And that's when we were maybe saying, sometimes you have to stand alone, because you are the only person in that position of privilege. I have a tense aspect between Pluto and Mercury, and I've been in that position when I know why I've been the only person speaking up, because I was the only one that wasn't afraid of losing something, because maybe I had a safety net or I had something else. So there's no pulling together the society or people or tribe around me, because I knew that they could not afford to make that decision. To make that decision meant maybe losing too much. And they were not, not courageous, but not prepared enough to do that. The fight was not, what they were fighting for potentially was not worth what they could lose. That balance was completely off. But this is happening, with our families. This is happening within our companies where we have or we work in toxic environments. There's a lot going on in the world, actually, in the news around, people speaking up to a huge behemoth companies about the way they are treated, or the way the environment in the way they work in is not healthy. And this is happening on a global scale with countries and governments leading people in not the way that people want to be led. And yet that confirmation is not there, which leads me to another thing that I'm just going to pile in here. We have Mars and Venus in the sky, again, having a tense aspect. There's loads of tension in the sky. And those are the two lovers that do not get along at the moment. So that's another kind of, yet another layer of that. It's like, what's happening there? Why is our desires and that vision that we have with Venus in Pisces not getting translated? And Mars in Gemini is getting frustrated. It's been in Gemini for so long and in retrograde, and it still can't get through with the message that is trying to get through. So there is that tension as well, and I'm interested how that translates into our own lives, as well as the translation into the world and mundane astrology. Sorry, guys, I just went
Oh,
a
good.
bit deeper, I think, but it feels like it's not It's an interesting month, and I have to find a new word. Honestly, I need to find a different vocabulary and find a different word, because every month I say it's an interesting word, and I might just get a sticker or like a pin. It's an interesting month.
Is it
Next time you
ever
see me
not
at the,
interesting when we're
I
talking about
know,
astrology? Come on, it's
I
always
know.
interesting. Yeah.
um, but yeah, this Aquarian month really started 2023 on that kind of really eye-opening way, I think.
Yeah. I'm just going to throw out there that tagging on to that Mercury Pluto conversation, that for those who are feeling this energy already or have been feeling Pluto at 28 degrees Capricorn really pushing some of their trigger points in their chart, I believe that the contact, the conjunction's exact, I think it's on the 10th of February. And then the next day, if I remember correctly, that's when Mercury's going to move and ingress into Aquarius. So, that big, like everything's building, and then there's that push to do it differently, be out of the box, is coming. And Mercury disposits, right? It's the ruler of Mars hanging out there in Gemini. So there's something about, I think, we have to think differently before we can act differently. And I'm real curious if perhaps all in the US, when we were talking about defund the police as a slogan that's been out there for about 2 years, 3 years now, the whole idea behind that is we can't just restructure. It has to be something different. And I'm not saying yay or nay to that saying, but the idea that that saying is an out of the box approach. Instead of just doing what we've done before, trying to fix things or improve things the way we fixed or improved before isn't working anymore. And this, I think, kind of for me ties everything together. Uranus is pushing, saying, you have to do it different. You have to let go of the way it has been. You got to speak truth to power, which means we got to figure out how we're going to restructure. Thank you, Capricorn. And then here's Mars saying, and we need to take action based on thinking differently, and we need to take action to do it differently. And that can be rough because, like Monica was saying, the lovers are fighting. Here you've got, Mars and Venus. Mars is hanging out at 11 degrees of Gemini. Venus is at 12 degrees of Pisces. That's pretty tight. And so what I desire is to not have conflict. And what I desire is to have some peace and joy. And what I desire is to be, the unity spiritual. We are all one. But what I need to do is take some action and speak some truth, which might feel like it's going to be pretty divisive. But it's about doing things differently that's going to enable us, I think, to get what we truly want.
And that's a theme that Uranus been urging us to do the last couple of years, or since 2018. Look at things in a way, act in a different way, have a new vision. So yeah.
Yeah, I do think that this month especially is preparing us for the March ingress. So we have ingress in March. We have Pluto going into Aquarius for the next 20 years. It will retrograde, but then it will go back. So we have a huge shift. And then we have Saturn moving to Pisces as well. But what I was thinking, actually, Kimberly, as you were saying, I was thinking that with Pluto going through Capricorn in 20-year cycle and then going to Aquarius for 20-year cycle, it's like, well, if you're not going to learn the lesson of transformation in Capricorn, and you're not going to restructure your structures in Capricorn, you're going to revolutionize them in Aquarius. So it's like, it's, we always say, that astrology is not predictive. It's not about predicting the future. It's about looking at the cycle and seeing what we can learn from that archetype and what that archetypal energy brings. And I feel like we're always trying on this podcast bring both the positive and proactive approach to the archetype, and also the negative, expression of that archetype. But there is something about it. We had 20 years of Pluto in Capricorn, and when we look back at our structures, wherever you live, in whichever country, when you look back at your government, your structure, your education, has that improved and transformed for better or for worse. Because if it transformed for better, then that Plutonian power, in Aquarian can give, again, people more power. People will have more power in Aquarius. If those structures have not transformed or transformed for the worse, then Pluto in Aquarius will bring the transformation with people, but in a revolutionary kind of way. And again, we've seen that in numerous situations. I mean, America was built on one of the revolutions. There was a structure that wasn't working for people, and in 1700 they said enough. There was another huge revolution in France, for example. There's so many, and I'm only talking about the two big ones that or came to my mind because they were drilled in me in my own education in Poland. But there's so many other revolutions that happen around countries where structures that didn't fit, so the revolution had to change them. And I feel like we are on that cusp of we're moving into another 20-year cycle. Some people are not old enough to remember the cycle before the Pluto in Capricorn, because they were born with Pluto in Capricorn. So what is it that we can learn from that cycle? And, how are we going to revolutionize that? Because Aquarius is not going to be gentle. I don't feel like it.
Revolutions are not gentle.
No.
They are fraught with battles and danger and death and destruction. And yeah, but it's like I always say, if life is throwing you the Tower card, leave the building, and then build something new with the rubble that's left. So it's time for things to get torn down, and it has been really difficult, and will continue, I believe, to be difficult as we're making this shift about, like you said, Pluto shifting signs.
Yeah.
So I guess that what I'm saying is our next 2 or 3 podcasts, Monica, are going to be interesting, to use your favorite word.
There. I'm honestly going to find a synonyms. I'm going to have a stickers here all over.
So I invite our listeners, if you've made it this far, I want you to put in the comments what are some synonyms for interesting that we can use going forward.
Yeah.
Curious to hear.
Yeah, give me something. That's awesome.
Do you guys have other
Yeah.
thoughts about this, or is this a good time for me to pull up the chart? And I will put in the comments section chart at the end and the timestamp for it, so that if people are listening
Yeah.
to this, they can at least look at the chart before they're listening to us kind of talk about it.
I think we can pull up the chart and go into our
All right.
tips and tricks.
Give me just 1 second then. So here we are, our wonderful, lovely full moon chart. And any final thoughts of anything that we didn't talk about that maybe we don't have time to go in depth on, but that you wanted to throw out there? I think, Monica, you had a real interesting comment about the degrees of the lunations earlier.
Yes. That wasn't actually my observation. It was an astrologer that I follow that mentioned that the first 4 lunations, the full moons especially, are the 16 degrees. So the January, the February, March, and April full moon will be at the 16 degree of that sign, which is just a interesting observation, and interesting how those 4 archetypes, one after another, will be activated in that middle point of the sign, in that second decan. So yeah, that was just an observation.
Yeah. And something I noted is, although we don't usually put on our charts things other than the major planets and points, but if you work with Black Moon Lilith, she's at 4 degrees of Leo. So she's going to be making a wide orb conjunction with that moon, but she's making a tight trine to the Jupiter in Aries. So a nice fire trine. So I kind of feel like this may be getting our passions and our fury and how they intertwine really, really motivated. And I think some of our pain of the past may get converted into anger about the past, about I'm not going through this again. I think that can be the battery that really pushes or sustains us, helps us to find the courage to move forward, to move through. It feels like we're breaking through or breaking past something in this 2-week transition.
Mm.
All right. If no one has any other thoughts, how about tips or tricks?
I think I'm just going to repeat the tip that I had earlier on. If you do have your moon journal, if you do have a journal, look back to the time of the new moon in August last year and look what was happening, what themes were coming up for you at the time, and how do you emotionally really react to them now. What happened in the last 6 months to help you grow in that archetype, in your courage, in your joyfulness, in your generosity. What helped you in the past 6 months grow your heart capacity, if you will. And what do you need to let go? What have you learned over the last 6 months that you decided that you need to let go now?
Fabulous. Anne, any thoughts?
Yeah, we'll go with the Leo sign also, to check your chart for where you have the Leo, and think about your inner child and your creativity. We have a lot of new energy coming our way, so it's also good to take care of yourself and relax. And the full moon is also a good time to do some self-treatments and think about where you can find some fun and embrace your inner child and be a bit silly also.
I'm going to tag on to that and say, I feel like there's a lot of work we can do, but the nature of these aspects is going to pull us into doing that work. I don't know that we have to consciously try, although that doesn't mean not to be conscious. I just mean I don't think we have to try. But I do think it's important to not lose sight of that moon in Leo in the midst of all the hard work and all the fights and all the changes. So I'm just going to say I'm focusing on remembering to have fun, finding my joy, what feels like play to me, and then doing more of that. And to be honest, as a person who tends to focus a lot more on the work that needs to get done, I forget to think about the play. So making that a focus for those 2 weeks is to find time to play with my inner child, the healthy, happy one, and not the wounded one, but the healthy, happy one, and to get out there and have some good times.
And I have to say, I can't believe how fraught with all the issues this recording has been. From the picture quality to some of the microphone mishaps. I mean, some of that we will be able to edit, and some of that we won't. But I'm just thinking, like I said a few episodes before, it just feels like the moon that we're talking about has an impact on how we record. And it just feels like that Uranian energy was really present today.
Very present and helped by the trickster Mercury, no doubt.
Yes.
Yeah. All right. Well, I look forward to seeing you both and all of our viewers in 2 weeks when we get to talk about the next new moon, which will be happening on, I think it's February 20th. So feel free to comment, tell us about your experiences that this lunation brings up. What is that lightning bolt volcanic eruption for you, if there is one? What is the power you're speaking to? Let us know if anything we had in today's chat resonates with you. Love to hear how the astrology is working in your world as much as in ours.
Thank you all.
Thank you.
Bye. Thank you for joining us in this week's AstroChat. We hope that you enjoyed the discussion and would love to hear about anything that resonated with you. Keep the conversation going by posting shareable content on our Instagram, Facebook, or YouTube pages. You can also email us at astrochatpodcast@gmail.com. AstroChat is uploaded every 2 weeks on the Saturday before each new and full moon. Look for us on your favorite podcast platform as well as on YouTube. You can support AstroChat and receive exclusive content by donating on our Patreon page. We look forward to chatting with you all again at the next lunation of the moon.